Good morning, everybody. What a pleasure and honor to be here. And Vanessa and I were just speaking about all the incredible panelists and how, for myself, you might have seen me writing down all these notes because as a professor and as an academic, all I could think about was how incredible all of these women are and just the incredible will that people have and women have, and when women decide they want to do something, they get it done. And so I've just been so thrilled and honored, and so thank you all for being here. And thank you also for Vanessa for writing this incredible book. I had the opportunity to read this before I came to Sakyadhita, and I devoured it in about a day. And I was just delighted by it. And one of the things that I want to share is that Dr. Sasson's book really expresses not only the desire and the will for ordination for the first Buddhist women, but also the difficulties and the challenges that are very similar to the difficulties and the challenges that our Bhikshuni have been discussing today on the panel. And so what a wonderful treat to bring these two together. So thank you for that. And I thought I would, rather than, we had originally created a panel of 3 different scholars to talk about Dr. Sasson's book, but as we know in Buddhism, things change, and we had to pivot, and so it was just me. And so I thought rather than a panel of just one person talking about this book, I would interview you and have you share some of your insights about the book. And so I had a number of questions, and so the first one is if you can give us an introduction and an overview of your book for those who have yet to read this wonderful gem. In other words, what is it about? How is it structured? And if we can begin there, that would be great.
Thank you so much. First, I want to say I've been practicing this all morning. I got it wrong. 안녕하세요. Was that right? Okay, good. It's very long. And I want to thank everyone for being here. And I, too, was utterly humbled and amazed to hear the presentations and almost feel like they should just have the whole stage. So I feel a little embarrassed to have this moment here, but I'm also very, very grateful. This book meant a lot to me to write, and this book is very much an outgrowth of all my experiences at Sakyadhita. It's about a lot more. It's many years of research, many years of writing, but also very much connected to my years of coming to Sakyadhita and learning as much as I get to learn each time I come, and all the relationships that develop when you come here, and hearing the stories, like hearing the stories that we heard today. And one of the lines that actually struck me at the beginning of this session was something that Dr. Tashi said. She said, "It looked like a miracle, but it was not a miracle." And that really struck me. I think that is true today, and it was not a miracle in some ways in ancient times based on the text that we have. So it feels very resonant, and I'm very grateful to be here, and I'm very grateful to Sharon and to the organizing committee and Dr. Ensu and everyone else who allowed this to happen. So thank you so much, and to Jetsuma and Karmadek Shetsomo for all of your inspiration over the years. So this book is a bit of a surprise to me. Especially because it's the second book like it, and it's still a bit of a surprise to me. I wrote a book a few years ago before I wrote this one. So I'm a scholar of Buddhist studies, and I focus on the ancient Buddhist texts from the Pali and Sanskrit materials, and very focused on early Buddhist stories. I love stories, I love telling stories, I love listening to stories. It is where my heart and my mind comes the most alive. And so whenever I find a great story in an ancient text, I get very excited, and then I just want to tell it over and over again. And so I wrote a number of academic books, and one day I thought, I want to just tell a story. I don't want to stand outside it and study a story. I just want to tell a story. And the story that I wanted to tell before I told this one was the story of Yasodhara, which to me struck me as such a beautiful and tragic and inspiring story. And so I wrote a novel, which was an odd decision for a scholar to make, but I wanted to tell her story. And that book was complemented by endnotes where I explained in the book, here's the story that I wrote based on these stories that I read. And so you see at the end of the book all the texts that I use and all the books that I read to help me craft the story of Yasodhara as best as I could understand it. So that story came out a few years ago, and as soon as I was finished with that book, I had to do it again. And I knew that the next book had to be this story that is being lived today, that is also very strong in the ancient world. And so I pick up this book right where the Yasodhara book left off, so they're almost like sequels, they're almost like partner books. And so Yasodhara's book ends with Mahapajapati Gautami leaving the palace after the king dies and going to ask the Buddha for ordination. And so she walks out of the palace. I just gave you the ending of the last book, so that was a bit of a spoiler, but anyway, that's how it ends. And so she walks out, and Yasodhara is right behind her. And of course, all these other women just show up and are right behind them. And these women walk into the forest to ask the Buddha this great request. And so this book opens where that one ended. And the women are now walking to see the Buddha in Bamboo Grove. And they make their request. And it is a story that I'm sure is very familiar. I kind of feel like I don't have to introduce it here. I feel like of all audiences, I don't have to tell you how it went, but just in case. They go into the forest and they make their request. And there are different versions of how the story goes. We have different vinyas. And so in each vinya, the story is a little bit different. But at the end of the day, he doesn't say, the Buddha doesn't, Mahapajapati Gautami says, may we have ordination, may we become nuns like the monks. And in the Pali text, whenever a monk wanted to become when a man wanted to become a monk, he just said, can I become a monk? And the Buddha said, come. That was the whole story. And so the women go and they say, may we become nuns? And he doesn't say, come. It's a much more complicated answer. It's evasive, it's unclear, and different Vinaya traditions articulate it slightly differently, so there's some discussion among scholars as to what it all means, but at the end of the day, he doesn't say come. He more or less says, it's best if you don't ask the question, which is unclear. And so Mahapajapati Gautami is left in very uncertain territory because she has made the decision to leave. She can't just go back because the road is difficult. You don't go home the moment it doesn't work out for you. So she's made this decision to go. So she can't go home, but she can't go with him. And so she's left in this very strange space that doesn't belong anywhere. And when I've told my students that story, they say, well, but she's choosing a life of asceticism. She's not supposed to belong anywhere. She's homeless. Except that's not quite how it works. There's homelessness, but then there's also a sense of lineage and connection that is part of this life. And that's what she still doesn't have. And so yes, she's homeless and doesn't have anywhere to go, and that kind of makes sense, but it kind of doesn't. And so she's left in between. And then this is the part that has always amazed me, is that she made that request 3 times according to the Pali Vinaya. 3 times she says, can I ordain? And he says something, but not come. And so after the 3rd request, that should be it, because 3 is the charm. In India, 3 times, no rice, no rice. Right? Like, I don't want, no, 3 times. But she says 3 times, and he says 3 times sort of no. So it should be no. So she should go home or somewhere else. But this is the part that just amazed me. And every time I talked about it in my classes, I thought, this is the moment. She just follows him anyway. And so he says no 3 times, and then the women are just walking to Vesali to ask again. But he said it 3 times. So this is the part that has always just mesmerized me, is the women just went, well, it'll be the 4th time then. And they just go and they make their request again in the next town. And so it's this courage and this kind of fascinating gumption of these women to say, I want this. The process isn't finished, that your answer wasn't complete. Something, and we can interpret it in a million ways, but we're not done with the conversation. So I'm going to show up again at your doorstep, and I'm going to ask again. And so they do, and they walk all the way through the forest, and they ask again. And the way I understand the story, so I don't know if I'm like going over-winded here. Should I keep
going? I
Okay.
have a follow-up question.
All right. So the book that really inspired me was the Therigatha. And what you have with the Therigatha is these poems of the first nuns, and they're all so different. And they all have different life experiences. So each poem is a story of a Buddhist nun. And at the end of each poem, she declares in this kind of very powerful way, "And I became free." So these women are they're really quite impressive. And when they attain awakening, they don't say, "But no. Or, "I'm sure your awakening is better than mine." Or, "Please sit in front of me, I don't mean it, it's okay." Like there's, like all of that is not there. The Therigathas, these women where they say, "Here's my life. It was hard. I followed the Buddha. I became free." Every poem is the same in that structure. Every poem ends with, "I did this." And their stories are all so different. So I just thought I was in the presence of so many fascinating women who figured out how to get to that point and say, "I am free, period, and stop, no apology." And they don't all get to that point with this pure aspiration. This was the other part that really impresses me about the Therigatha. And if you haven't read it, please read it, because it's one of the greatest gems of Buddhist writing. It's about 2,000 years old, it's a Pali text, and it's magnificent. Is that each of the women, when they say they set out to follow the Buddha, they do it with different intention. So some women, like Mahapajapati Gotami, she's clear. She wants this. She wants to become a nun. She wants to learn what the Buddha learned. It's clear what her motivation is. But then other poems, the women are totally different. So there's one woman in the Therigatha. Her name is Chanda. She's a poor widow on the side of the road. And she sees Patachara walking by. And she stops her, and in my head, you see I'm very imaginative. In my head, I see this woman sitting, and she grabs, I don't know if that's how it went, but in my head, that's what it is. She grabs Mahapajapati Gotami, Patachara, and the women passing by, and she says, "Please, please, if I go with you, would you feed me?" That's her poem in the Therigatha. And Patachara says yes. And so she becomes a nun because she was hungry. Not because she had some pure motivation of like, I want to become a Buddha. She wasn't talking about that. She was just hungry, right? There's another woman in the Therigatha, Sundarinanda, who was a princess, and her poem in the Therigatha is very funny. She's like, everybody else left, so I guess I'll go too. She was lonely and she just wanted to go where all her friends went. So that's why she went, right? But this is the reality of life, is that women become nuns for all kinds of reasons. People make life choices for all kinds of reasons, and they're not always pure. But at the end of the story, they all became free. And so it's this amazing collection of diversity, of all these different kinds of women, all these different aspirations, all these different women with different stories, saying, okay, let's walk, let's go, let's do this. And so all of them are walking behind Mahapajapati Gotami, each with their own story, which feels like all of us, it feels like every human I know, is that we each have our own story of why we do what we do, but their trajectory is getting them to where they want to go. And so they get to Vesali, and they ask again. And this time, the Buddha, I think he feels a little cornered, because the women are not going away. And so he says, okay, which is kind of where we just got to on this panel as well, of like, okay, let's do this. But it was not a miracle, and it was not easy, because he puts conditions attached, which I'm sure are very familiar to everyone in this room, is that he says, and this is, I'm reading from the Garudhammas, but the Pali Vinaya, but all the Vinayas have an articulation of this, of here are the conditions, and he gives the Garudhammas, all the rules that women will have to follow to ensure that they always stay behind the monks. And that's a very painful part of the story, and it's a part of the story that I wrestled with a lot. How do I tell this part of the story? What do I do with this? So I'm not gonna tell you anymore. I'm gonna stop there, and you guys have to read the book. But I really wrestled with telling a story that was inspiring and complicated and painful and current and ancient. And at the end of the book, I do what I did with Yasodhara, is that I give endnotes. There's lots of endnotes, and I could have kept going, and my publisher was like, that's enough. But I have about 30 pages of notes in the back, again, that shows the reader, these are the texts I use at every step of the way so that every reader can decide for themselves what they think I've done. Right? How I interpreted the text, why I interpreted them in the way that I did, so that you have all the information as a reader to sit with it and go, oh, I see what she did. Do I agree? Do I not agree? That becomes your agency. But I offer all of it in this book. And I wanted, this is the last thing I'll say, and then I won't be as long-winded for the next question. But I wanted very much, and I wanted to say this, is that my goal, once the book got published, I knew that I had to make this place be the first place that I share this book publicly. There was nowhere else that I would give a first talk. It had to be here. And so it's very, very emotional and meaningful for me that I get to share this book with you in this moment and with Sharon.
Thank you, Vanessa, and don't worry about being long-winded. If anything, we learned that we should take up space. So I'm glad to hear all about your motivations for the book. And you refer to this book as an academic novel. And I'm very curious, but I kind of know the answer already as to why you called it an academic novel in terms of the concerns that you might have had. We're both academics in the Buddhist studies world, and novels have not traditionally been considered an authentic form of scholarship. And so I want to applaud you, first of all, for doing something different. And I think it falls very much in line with the Buddhist tradition of upaya, or skillful means. Teach according to the needs of the listener. And quite frankly, not everybody's going to want to sit and read text. And this room probably, but the general public, no. And one of the things that I like to make a lot of connections between what I read and what I'm hearing. And as I listened to Dr. Marley Ucha's presentation and hearing about the creation of these videos that you're posting on Facebook, that you're posting on YouTube, and finding these alternative ways of getting a message across about the ordination of women, I feel that your book falls very much in a similar vein of telling a story in a different way so that more people will be able to listen and hear the truth in the story. So I want to commend you on that. The book is quite beautiful and inspiring, and one of the questions that I had was what this particular format of the academic novel, as well as the notes in the back. I will say the notes are fascinating. Most of us who read academic books, we get to the notes and we only want to look for that one thing that we want to read. The rest of it, we just, not a big deal. But the notes in this book are fascinating and inspiring, and you include not only the academic resources that you use, but also some of your own choices and why you chose this particular story or chose your particular interpretation. So my question for you is, what does this format that you've chosen, what does this reveal about the Buddhist tradition, or how does it connect to the Buddhist tradition?
I have to think about that for a second. It's a good question. It could be really long-winded again, though. I'll try to be brief, but to be honest, I chose this format because I wanted to tell a story. So on the most basic level, it was a pleasure. I see it in my students' faces. I'm sure everyone here who has students in different contexts, when they're like falling asleep and looking at their phone or trying to wait to get out of the room, and when you have it. When they're like, oh, I'm listening, something's happening. That moment. And I know that moment happens in my classroom when I tell a story. And I know that I lose them as soon as I go into theory and they're all just looking at their phones. And I think we're all the same on some level. And I think Buddhism has known this forever. So Buddhism has a lot of theory, and Buddhism has a lot of rules and a lot of really complicated texts. It also has great stories, and it has been telling these stories for thousands of years. And this is the part that I find so interesting, is that Buddhism tells the same stories over and over, as though we're never quite done with the story. Like, we just need to tell it again. Like, you look at the story of the Buddha's life, it has been told thousands of times through the Buddhist world. It gets painted on every wall, it gets sung, it gets recited, it gets performed on stages. Little children learn it in school. Like, it's just, the story keeps getting told. And every generation, it's as though it's all new again. And they have to tell the story again, and you have to learn it again. And each time we tell these stories, it's like we see them just a little bit differently. We look at them and we go, oh, right, I never saw that piece before because I just told it from a different angle. So it seemed to me that as a scholar who's always asking questions and wants to learn, which I think is the goal of scholarship, is to just perpetually be learning, I had this question at one point of what am I missing if I'm just looking at it from the outside? What am I not learning? What am I not seeing? Like, where's my blind spots? Because as a scholar, I see a lot of things. But there's a lot of things I don't see because I'm standing so far away. And so what if I did that forbidden thing and got really, really close? What if I climbed in? What if I let myself be part of the story? What would I see then? And I find that I've learned the tradition differently by being the storyteller instead of studying other storytellers. So these women, I don't think I ever appreciated how impressive and how gutsy they were, that they went the fourth time. I don't think I registered it was 4 times, that they got rejected 3 times and they went for the 4th. And I think if he said no the 4th time, they would have gone for a 5th. And I didn't appreciate that until I became the storyteller. And then when I wrote their stories, I thought, oh, right, these women were something.
I have a follow-up question to this, so thank you for that. I got very excited by that too. So in this book, we see a lot of the story of the ordination and the request for ordination of the first nuns through the perspective of Vimala. So I'm curious why you centered her story, what was the motivation, and what would you like the audience to know about Vimala and her experience?
So to tell this story, I had to choose who was going to be the focus. And what I quickly realized was all the people who could not be the focus, and it was all the women who intimidated me. So Gautami could not be the primary person because she's just too big, and I just thought I would disappoint her if I tried to write in her voice. Like, I felt like she was behind me going, no. I was like, okay, I'll stay away. I couldn't do Kema or Upalavana for the same reasons. Also, their stories, especially Upalavana, was a very complicated backstory that I wasn't prepared to take on. So there was definitely a sense that some women's characters are so big in the Buddhist imagination that it was a trespass for me to get too close to them, that I didn't feel comfortable doing it. I needed to find a character that I could play with without feeling like I was trespassing. So I looked through the Therigatha over and over and over again for a character that I could connect to that was minor. And I chose Vimala because she doesn't appear almost anywhere else. So she's very, very minor in the Therigatha. She has 1 poem. She has almost no other stories anywhere else that I could find. And so she was quiet enough that I could be with her and let her expand. So it was more of a creative choice. But there was also a sense that certain sacred characters in the tradition are too sacred for me to play around with. So that's kind of my answer.
Okay, thank you for that. And in writing and taking on this incredibly important story, which resonates with every single person on this panel today, as an academic, you shared some of the concerns that you had, and you added in this notes that showed all of your scholarly expertise. You are more than prepared to be able to tell this story from a novelistic perspective. But my question for you is, what concerns, if any, did you have in publishing this book and retelling this story?
Oh my God, so many. I mean, anyone in my family can attest. Actually, my mother is here. She came with me on this trip, so she's somewhere in the back over there. She can attest to all of this. Every time I publish a book, I go through a wave of, I spiral into panic just before it goes to press, because there are a lot of worries. And being a public person is always a risk. And being a public person in the field of religious studies, I'm sure you know this as well, when you work in our field, it's a bit of a tightrope, and it's very easy to get into trouble really fast. It's working from a historical perspective, from a critical perspective, with materials that millions of other people consider sacred. And so it's very easy to trespass into places that hurt, or to be misunderstood, or to enter a no-fly zone. And it's tricky. But I want to do it, and I think it's an important thing that we do the work that we do, that we are scholars in the field of religion studies, even though we bump into sensitivities over and over and over again. It's part of what I think creates a healthy society. So I think that we have to keep doing the work that we do, but I think it always engenders some nervousness. Who's going to be upset? What if I've said something, I didn't have a sentence in there that just gets pulled out of context? And in our field, this really does happen. So it happens even more when you become public by writing a novel versus when you're a scholar, we're kind of hidden away for the most part, right? There's 10 people that read your books. And they all know you. It's a small little network, and we all know each other, and we've all been with each other for a very long time. So it becomes very insular. I think it's very important to be a public writer, because I think it can be a service. I think we have to do more with our education, with our work, with our skills. But the more public you get, the more that stress emerges of where is it going to bounce back. And we are living in a precarious world, which is what the theme is of this conference. And we are living in a world of increasing fascism and increasing fundamentalism. It's real. And so we can bump into those walls really fast. And I do worry about that. But I also think of those first Buddhist women. I now think of the women that are on this panel, and I think, I have a lot of words, but I'm going to edit and just say politely, no, just keep going forward and do what you have to do. So onwards we go.
Yes, thank you. There's a room full of firsts here, and the panel full of firsts. And so this gathering of the first Buddhist women that are highlighted in this book, we're amongst firsts here, and it's such a thrill and an exciting honor to be amongst all of you who are firsts in your own respective lineages and traditions. So many of you are transgressors in the best of ways, and we have a panel of nuns who have not taken no for an answer, and you have shared this novel of women who have not taken no or even responded to a non-no with a lot of perseverance. So for the women and everybody in this room, what sort of guidance would you have in encountering the no? I mean, you have this book where you tell this whole story of women who don't accept no. We have this panel using different methods, whether it's YouTube or Facebook or now a novel. What would you offer for all the people in the room who are interested in exploring a different way of responding to the no's?
I feel like everyone in this room would have their own answer to that question, actually, and you probably have your own answer to that question. I think you have to be careful, to be honest. I think we are in a precarious world, and you have to think carefully, and I think you're taking a risk, and that has to be calculated, and that has to be mitigated as best as it can. I think these things have to be done carefully. I would not have written this book 20 years ago, even if I'd had the idea, because my position as a scholar was not as safe as it has, given temporariness and everything else, but I'm in a position now where I can take a risk that I couldn't have done 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. I think that's real. And so I would never say, just throw caution to the wind and let's just go, because I think that's a risk, and I think that can hurt a lot of people, and I think people have to eat, and people need their jobs, and they need their security, and women have gotten hurt many, many times, and I wouldn't ever counsel anyone to do it. But if you can do it, and you're in a position where you think it can happen, then go.
Yeah. So this concept of being against the stream is one that's quite resonant in Buddhist circles. And one of the things, Vanessa, that you shared is that when many of us reach a point where we are safe enough to be able to write and say the things that we need to say without risking everything that we fought so hard for. And so we have this responsibility, if we've made it to a particular point, to serve as mentors for others, to serve as a safe refuge, to serve as a resource for others who might not be there yet. And so as academics, we're both tenured. I'm a full professor, which means it's really hard to fire me. And so because of that position, I feel like I have a tremendous responsibility for those who are coming after me. And we see so many times in the world of, even in feminist circles that we run, there's a lot of gatekeeping because the experiences of women have been so difficult that when you reach a certain level, sometimes you don't want to go back and help everybody else. But I feel like this book and that you've been able to write a book like this to inspire others who might wish to do similar things, especially in the world of academia, which is dry still, very male as well. 3 minutes? Okay, I think we got this.
Well, so if we go back to the story, and we can end on that note, because I think we're supposed to end now. The first woman to ask for ordination, that was the queen of the Shakya kingdom. It wasn't Chanda who was by the side of the road. Chanda needed help. And it was the movement that this queen was able to create that would help Chanda get up from the side of the road. So I do think there's it's not always the queens that are going to do it, but I do think there's something interesting about that it was someone who was safe enough who would say, I'm going to go break this wall down now. And I think that there's something realistic about that and fair and humbling too, that we can't all do everything all the time. But when we can, we should. I think.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.